What is up, Wizards fans? Welcome to another Believe in Wizards podcast. I'm Matt Modderno, joined here today by Varun Shankar, the Washington Post beat reporter for the Wizards this year, new to the beat. So first of all, man, great job so far and liking the coverage.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be on.
So just how's everybody treating you so far? Everybody being good and kind of welcoming and all that good stuff?
No issues at all. Everyone's been super welcoming. It's been great to actually get started on everything now that the real games are starting to pick up.
Yeah, that's kind of my one message to fans too, is everyone covering this team is really nice. And I think that goes a long way when people are just friendly to be around. So good to hear they're treating you well. Before we get too far into it, we're brought to you by Stateside Vodka and their Surfside hard iced teas, hard lemonades, hard half and halves. Really all delicious, and you can't go wrong. And they're perfect for football tailgates. So keep that in mind, everybody. Now it's football season. We're also brought to you by BetOnline. It's your number one source for all your summer needs this season. Obviously, with the NFL in full swing, that's probably the biggest moneymaker for all the betting sites. So go out there and get the latest stats, news, scores, odds, all that good stuff. For your favorite teams, especially the Commanders fans here in the area. A lot more to bet on happily these days. So head to the website or use your mobile device to get on the action. Bet online where the game starts. All right, cool. So let's just start it out with just any major takeaways for you so far from Media Day. Is there something that one person said or a couple guys that were recurring themes that kind of really struck a chord with you?
Yeah, I have one that's like a very big picture one, and then a
Okay,
couple more like small, like actual player
let's do it.
related, game related stuff. The first
Okay,
thing is this team is realistic about where they are. When Will
sure.
Dawkins, he didn't do this on Media Day a couple days beforehand, he
Mhm.
talked about the stages of a rebuild and the deconstruction phase and the laying the foundation. There's
Yep.
building back up, there's fortifying what you've built. He said the Wizards are still in the deconstruction and laying the foundation stage.
Mhm.
They are like the Wizards know who they are, they know what they are. But at the same time, even if they, are in another season where they're going to lose a good chunk of their games, not all losses are created equal.
Sure.
And I think that they want to have the right kind of losses. And I think what they define as the right kind of losses, obviously you don't want to lose in any circumstance. But,
Mhm.
if you are going to, you want to make it a competitive game. You want it to be close. You don't want to be rolling over, midway through the game or after the third quarter. And then
Mhm.
throughout the season, you want to have team morale and team camaraderie stay pretty high, even if it's not, the high flying season.
I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And I was a little first of all, I'm glad he said it that way and was just sort of transparent about it. It was a little disconcerting, as a fan, to hear we're just still in the deconstruction phase. I think you can do a little bit of those things in parallel, which is nice. It doesn't mean that they're not adding to the foundation while still, tearing things down. But it, the takeaway, I think, for me first was wow, we really are in for the long haul here, unless they can start to get some of these picks right, and then that becomes really important for
Mhm.
to see some of these guys pop, like Coulibaly having a big step forward this year. I think would it give everybody a big peace of mind, similar to to jump like a Shaden Sharp took in year two in Portland or something like that. Just seeing a little bit more of the skill set on display, which also requires him to get minutes and touches and things like that,
And I
to
think,
actually show that off. So,
yeah, no, 100%. And I think that it's a bit weird because obviously they're trying to build through the draft. And the first
mhm,
year they come in, they've got the number 8 pick. Not really like, that's not a team that they really worked on too much when they
mhm.
got the number 8 pick and took or number 8 or 7. I always forget.
Uh, they had the eighth pick. They traded up to take him at 7.
Okay, so 7. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so they, mid lottery pick basically.
Mhm.
And then last year, it's a draft class that doesn't have the high end talent of a lot of others,
Yeah.
right? There isn't a Wemby, there isn't a Zion type player in this past draft. But this upcoming year, there obviously is, and there's
That would
obviously
be
the big
nice.
one, Cooper Flag, but there's also players like Ace Bailey,
Mhm.
Dylan Harper. There's a lot of places for them to potentially make improvements
Yeah.
and take those bigger steps. And I think that's something that I find pretty intriguing. As like, obviously you want people them to hit on the draft, but where are the big upside swings they can take?
You can't always tell from media day quotes because I feel like a lot of guys are so well media trained at this point that the player speak is basically coach speak is basically organization speak. But all the veterans they brought in seemed to genuinely be looking forward to their opportunity and were kind of okay with being on a team that's in the position that the Wizards are in. Like Malcolm Brogdon, especially, talked about the ties he has to the area and being okay. finally being in a Wizard or being happy to be finally in a Wizards uniform and being okay with kind of helping with that mentor role. Like older guys are not always kind of in that position,
Mhm.
but it makes it for an interesting who will be here at the deadline conversation because it doesn't seem like these guys are itching to get out of here. But also, if you are still in that teardown phase, any of these guys that you're going to get value for, you probably have to flip at that point, regardless of kind of what a good veteran they are. So I don't know any kind of early sense here for just. I'm not asking you to predict like who gets traded at the deadline or anything like that, but just like how they'll kind of like go about that split really of like we need to keep a few guys to have like adults in the room, but also if anyone is interested in these people, we probably have to get something for them.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because, looking at last year's deadline, they obviously trade Gafford, but they don't trade Tyus Jones. And I am curious about what there is positionally with the point guard that they find valuable in having that veteran presence around because, it looks like for right now, the starting point guard is going to be Jordan Poole. But when you get off the bench, you've got Bub Carrington. He's obviously a rookie. You don't know what to expect from a rookie point guard.
Mhm.
Um, Brogdon is reliable. He's gonna execute the scheme. He's gonna be very he's gonna put people in good positions. He's really good at getting into the paint, which opens up, shooters on the perimeter, dump off passes, and what does that allow them to do from an evaluation standpoint? It's hard to tell what you have if the entire offense is just totally off the rails the entire time because you don't have that point guard there. And so
Mhm.
I wonder if because of that, Brogdon's value to them goes higher up than what his value, whatever he would fetch in a trade would be. But obviously, it depends a lot. Maybe he doesn't have that same impact at point guard this year. But that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
I think that's a great distinction, right? Like it's if you're only going to get a second round pick for him or something like that, it's definitely
Yes.
not worth it to me because he's also the guy that provides the stuff they love about Anthony Gill. I think you're going to get a lot of those same things from Malcolm Brogdon, except he can do it on the court at a higher level than Gill. No disrespect intended. It's just Brogdon is a 15 point per game, 4 rebound, 4 assist kind of guy
Mhm.
when healthy, and I think that limiting factor for him is the health, and that probably limits that trade value a decent amount. But in terms of what he gives you as the Wizards, when you don't really need to rely on him to play 82 games, I think the way you explain that is perfect. Is sort of you've got to balance that sort of sliding scale here a little bit. You mentioned Jordan Poole is locked into that starting point guard spot. That's basically the one starting position I feel like they've set outright just to kind of just stop any potential speculation about whether that's the case. But any sense for what the rest of the starting lineup looks like? I think for Wizards fans, do we see Alex Sarr start? Do we see Malcolm Brogdon start? Is it Corey Kispert? Is it Coulibaly? Like, obviously Kispert or is it Kuzma is going to start. And I think Valanciunas seems pretty locked in as a starter at this point as well. So any sense for what those other two starting spots look like?
Yeah, and this is not based on anything that Keith has said. This is just kind of looking at the roster and seeing. I would not be. I don't think Sar is going to start,
I'm on the same
just
page with you.
because I think if you have him, Valanciunas, and Kuzma, you're running into a bit of a spacing issue,
Yep.
right?
Agreed.
Especially, I think Bilal has a pretty good chance to start. I think they're really like high on what he can do.
Mhm.
And that two spot's pretty interesting. I'm still trying to get a feel for who they want to put there. I'm just going through the roster now and seeing if a name,
I
comes
kind of
to
go
mind.
back and forth on do you bring Brogdon in
Yeah.
as like the de facto
Mhm.
combo, but he could also be a good steadying presence off the bench. Whereas like Kispert, you just come in and space the floor, and the responsibilities for you are really kind of limited to just that. So
I think
that's where I'm stuck.
that's super valuable, right? Like that ability to space the floor is just going to open up
Mhm.
stuff for everyone else. And the fact that he's able to move around so much, he's not a stationary guy. He's able to,
Right.
move off ball, and he's one of the best in the league, honestly, at
Mhm.
cutting and finding those open spaces. What does that open down low for a guy like Jonas? If he clears out a side of the floor and now Jonas has a one-on-one to post up, this is a 265-pound guy coming right at you.
Yeah, I wouldn't envy anybody in the league that has
No.
to take a shoulder in the chest from a dude like that, no matter how big you are. So that's really going to be interesting to see. It's nice to hear that they're kind of not locked into that, and there is some amount of like, let's see how things look in camp and how pieces fit together. And I go back and forth with other fans about this a good amount, where it's, hey, you just drafted this guy number 2, he has to start. To me, like if he plays so well, you can't afford not to start him. that's a great problem to have. But also the luxury of not having to force him into minutes he may not be ready for yet is also a good problem to have. So I'm with you. I don't expect him to start. If he does, it means he looks really good, and that's great. But these guys were fine bringing Coulibaly along slowly. They were fine bringing Vucevic along slowly. I don't think they're going to feel pressure to shoehorn him in there, maybe at his detriment. Like, let him get some confidence, build some momentum off the bench. That's another reason I think to bring like Brogdon off the bench as well, is like a pick
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
roll of the two of them, I think would look really good. And also then you're not asking like Bub Carrington or Jared Butler to totally run your second unit for you. So I think that kind of makes everybody's life a little easier going that route.
Yeah, and I go back and forth on how much you want to put the rookies together,
Yeah.
but
Agreed.
if you want them to start developing chemistry, there are worse ways to do it than having Bub and Alex, run
Mhm.
a bunch of pick and rolls night after night after night together and start to develop that feel for each other. I also think one thing the Wizards have going for them is with Sarr, and this was, I think, one of the reasons that signing Jonas really helped, was a really good decision. Well, you insulate him a little bit by playing him a little bit at the forward so that he doesn't have to take on
Sure.
those bigger bodies. Well, listen, if there's one position the Wizards have a lot of, it's center. You've got Holmes,
Totally
you've got
opposite of last
Bagley.
year too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They got size, right?
Mhm.
Holmes, Bagley, Vucevic. And those are three guys right there who can play alongside Sarr, and each of them brings a little bit of a different element. And I am curious to see, who's on the roster and who they feel, what they want. What I'm curious which backup center they pick signifies about what they want from that position. Because
Mhm.
each of these guys brings very, very different things. I think Holmes and Bagley are much more, traditional rim runners. I think Holmes is a little bit bigger.
Yep.
Bagley gives you a little bit more, defensive versatility, but he's not as much of a rim protector. Vucevic is big. He can theoretically shoot a little bit more. The percentage didn't
Yeah, I
show up,
think
but
so.
I think the shot itself looks pretty good.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of different things they can do there.
It'd also be interesting too. I think what they do with that position tells you what they're looking for from like Bagley. Like if he's the main big off the bench immediately here, there's a reasonable chance that they're going to try to feature him and trade him. Whereas he's somebody that's young enough and cheap enough that you could either fit him into your longer term picture here if you wanted to, or you could maybe convince a playoff team who needs another big that, hey, he's healthy and he's a viable option for you too. So either way, like he might still have something left in the tank for other teams to look at. Whereas I doubt other teams around the league are saying like, oh, Rashawn Holmes might be a really nice piece for us. And that's not, again, intended to be disrespectful to Holmes. It's just the amount of money he makes for where he's at in his career. There's probably less teams with the flexibility to bring in, a marginal backup center at 13 million a year, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I am curious about what the values are for both of those players, just because with Bagley, it is pretty interesting just because he's like this archetype of a big that I don't think really exists too much anymore. A
Mhm.
four who doesn't defend the rim or shoot threes.
Yeah, just like a hustle, big, beat you, throw
Yeah,
it in kind of stuff.
rim runner. It's a skill set that you usually see. It's an offensive skill set you usually see paired with rim protection.
Mhm.
And when you take that away, I am curious about how that gets valued.
Yeah, if you just need like somebody to eat up some minutes and be a hustle player, like if I were him, I would be watching like Montrezl Harrell tape of just how do I beat guys with energy and be the first guy down the floor and things like that too. So, gonna be
And
interesting to see.
he's someone that Keith has praised a lot during media day for his
That's great.
preparation and his work ethic and all that.
Yeah, you hear good things about him,
Mhm. No, it's
and he's still young enough that like this is a dude that got taken as high as he did for a reason. If he figures it out, like that's why I was okay with him as like a player they took back last year because there is some at least theoretical upside left, and similarly, other teams may be able to see enough there to convince themselves of the same thing too.
And if you're a team that, when we talk about laying the foundation, part of it is just, who you're putting into the roster, getting these young players in, but there's also laying the foundation from a culture standpoint. And, this is something that if you had asked me
Mhm.
about, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have understood the importance of it that I do now. But I really think there is value in having someone in there who can teach these rookies how to prepare, how to really like, take care of their body, stuff that's,
Yeah.
NBA player 101, but is, really important to have. You need those 101 classes.
Mhm. Yeah, I just did an interview with a college player earlier today who said your body is your business, and their coaches taught them that. And I thought that was like a really good saying for younger players, especially to kind of take to heart because a lot of these guys, you show up as a freshman on a college campus, you don't have to do recovery and rest and all this stuff. And It's a lesson you got to learn earlier in your career here. So pretty interesting. Anything else from me today? You mentioned kind of having some smaller individual takeaways here. Other stuff that stood out to you?
Yeah, with the Jordan Poole, he just seems to be in a better place.
Mhm.
Like just like mentally. Corey Kispert said that he feels like Jordan's blood pressure is down, which I thought was pretty interesting.
I like that.
And he's going to be playing at point guard again, like he did after a lot after Keith took over
Mhm.
midseason. And it really seemed to do good things for him, getting to be on the ball and having that,
Yeah.
that control over the offense.
Mhm.
I am curious how that continues this year. I think that it's something that it's a huge responsibility, obviously, to be the starting point guard. Um, how does he embrace that? Is something that I'm curious about, both from a uh, mainly from a shot selection standpoint.
Mhm.
When you're the point guard, you have to be a little bit more cognizant of spreading
Yep.
the ball around, that kind of a thing that you
Mhm.
can't do when you're playing the two. I am
Can't call your
curious.
own number every time you touch the ball and things like
Yeah,
that too. Right.
and I think there is something to, last year when he was on the 2, he talked about this a little bit.
Mhm.
He's getting the best wing defender
Yeah. Sure.
every night,
Mhm.
night after night after night, and that takes a toll, and maybe this year it's a little bit easier because he's playing point guard. I'm curious to see how it really, because, he's someone who's on the books for a few more years, so and, you know, mentally, I think a lot of people group Poole and Kuzma together just because
Mhm.
these are both players who came in from other places and are famous.
Yep.
But Kuzma's 29, Poole's 25, I think.
Yep. It's a big difference from where they are in their careers at this point too.
Yeah, and you know what? He might even be younger than that. How old is Jordan Poole?
I think you're right. 25 is what I had mentally, but you could
Yep,
also be
25.
correct. Yep.
Dawkins called him a pre-prime player, which I thought was
Mhm.
really interesting. He's not someone who's theoretically hit the best version of himself yet. And so, if the Wizards can unlock him and make him, the kind of player that Golden State thought he was when they gave him that big extension,
Mhm.
that's another piece of the rebuild that, you might have figured out.
Want to circle back to Poole here in a minute, but got two questions for you in the chat. First one, Buddha Belly asks, do you expect any of these bigs to be here after the trade deadline? I guess the list of guys we just talked through. Well, how likely is it that all of these guys are here? I would say pretty slim personally,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
a couple of them, I don't think they're going to totally gut themselves of any big men depth.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Next question. It never makes no sense. Says, what was the general impression of Jonas? Couldn't tell if he was just here to do a job and didn't want to be here, or if that was the Baltic stoicism. So, any sense for what the vibes were like there?
I think Jonas is someone who it's hard to tell. These are press conferences, so
Sure.
I try not to like read too much into body language or tone or anything like that. One thing he said that I thought was pretty interesting was, he was talking about teaching younger players. He said something to the effect of, you know, I'm not a coach, but I'm going
Mhm.
to lead by example, and I think that's
Like that.
huge right then and there. And I think that he offers Sar, Vucevic, and some of these younger bigs a archetype of player that's really hard to play against.
Hmm.
A
Yeah.
really good screener, a really good post up player, a guy who's going to challenge you down low. We talked to Tristan today, and he said that something to the effect of, Vooch put his shoulder into him and was like, oh, and I was like, yeah, man,
Get hit
that's
by
how
a
it
car.
feels when
Yeah.
265 hits you. And so, I think that there's some real value that Jonas can bring, and Will raved about the conversations he had with him before they brought him in on the free agent deal.
I also kind of like the idea of a veteran that's not going to take it easy on them because they're rookies. Like he's still here to play basketball, and of the guys that probably fairly likely to get shopped around, like he wants to show he's still got a lot of gas left in the tank here for other teams. So for him, this is business 101. This isn't like here to hang out and help the young guys. So I'd be cool hearing like, oh yeah, he's busting our ass in practice every day, kind of
Yeah,
takeaways.
yeah, and I think there's also the basketball equivalent of an innings eater, right?
Mm,
He comes in, you can funnel the offense through him for a little bit, just take the load off everyone else a little bit.
yep.
And
And
I can
one
tell
thing
you a
go ahead,
couple things.
please. Mhm.
he's going to bring a lot of value rebounding, which is something obviously the Wizards were really bad at last
Yeah,
year.
for sure.
And the guards are very excited about what he's going to bring as a screen setter. He was talking a lot about Marcin Gortat during
I love that.
media day. Talking about how he watched Gortat film, and
Mhm.
obviously that's a great pick and roll guy right there. So that is another thing that I know that specifically Jordan talked about the value of.
Was literally just where I was gonna go with that and ask you this. One of the things we heard a lot last year in the preseason was how all this like two-man combo of Jordan Poole and Daniel Gafford is gonna be so electric. And then we never really saw much of that. I think it was largely because of the role that the Poole's in, being thrust a little more off ball there. But uh, Valanciunas said on Poole, like he's gonna live off of me. And I think that's to your point, like he's a dude who can get you a few more open looks. And that's really the thing for Poole, I think. Last year, it just seemed like every basket he got, he had to work so hard for. And because he didn't have the gravity of those other guys around him from Golden State. Like it just there weren't free opportunities as that number one, scouting report guy. So I think if Valanciunas does that for him, that's another guy that like, well, if he makes Poole's life so much easier, maybe you don't trade him if you're only getting a second round pick and some change back or 2 second round picks, whatever the case may be. So gonna be interesting there to see what that dynamic looks like.
100%. The effect he can have is cascading in a lot of the way that similar to having a guy like Corey. I think that he can have a different. The impact comes from a different spot on the floor, but I think it's
Mhm.
a similar gravity, like the way that you were talking.
Yep. No, I think that's the perfect word for it. And gravity. I think everybody thinks of just shooting gravity around the perimeter, but it's cutters have it. Guys that draw people into the paint to have to defend them. Draw doubles, things like that. Also have the same kind of impact there too. So that'd be
And
great to
this is
see.
sorry. This is going to
No,
be an
please.
offense that I don't like. Kuzma called it unconventional,
Mhm.
and I talked about Keith, and he didn't necessarily go that way, but he has talked about how they're gonna work a lot of different ball handlers. They're gonna empower guys. If you get the rebound, some people, some guys who aren't
Grab and go.
traditional guards are gonna have the opportunity to grab it and go. And so I am
Mhm.
curious to see what this looks like, and we're gonna obviously get at this first look Sunday.
Yeah, there's the sort of legendary couple week stretch of everybody eats here with the
Yeah.
Wizards, and past teams. But that's honestly kind of the blueprint I'm hoping they go with here because I think their best opportunity isn't Jordan Poole scores 25 and Kyle Kuzma tries to score 25. It's really a combination of, okay, maybe they're around 20 each or even high teens for somebody like Kuzma and more of a 8 rebounds, 6 assists kind of situation and getting other people involved because I think neither of them are dynamic enough scorers and efficiently enough in a vacuum that you can kind of run an offense. But if there are these other guys that take some pressure off of them, Coulibaly can get up to 10 or 11, Kispert's in the teens, Valanciunas is in the teens, things like that. You start to be harder to guard across the board. And I think that's really their best opportunity of having a more efficiently run offense. Last year, they put up numbers because they played at this insane pace. And that's the next thing I want to ask you about. I think we've heard more about pace, even maybe they play faster this year. So any sense for what they're going to try to do offensively, and do we think they're going to speed things up even more?
Lot of the three things that we've heard from Keith again and again is pace, ball
Mhm.
movement, player movement. So they're going to try moving around a lot and really trying to get out of the open floor. I don't know how that's going to pair with the defensive effort that they're trying to bring.
Mhm.
Just because it's you play fast. Teams that play fast aren't often good at defense. So
Sure.
you know, if they want to improve their defense, which they have said they want to, I am curious how those two factors mesh.
I'm glad you said the thing that you did about Valanciunas and the defensive rebounding. Like, I think some people that haven't seen him play in a few years think he's a little better defensively than he probably actually is. But his big value for them is ending possessions with somebody just to get a defensive rebound and kick that kind of quick outlet pass. So even just stopping other teams and maybe initiating the break a little quicker because he can end possessions, I think is another thing that can kind of both help their defense and facilitate offense at the same time.
Yeah, and they were they led the league in pace last year, obviously.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, even if they get to, that same number, is there a way to do it that feels a little more sustainable and a little less hectic? Just because a lot of
Mhm.
last year, because the defense was so bad, a
Yep.
lot of the inbuilt opportunities that you get to push the ball off rebounds, off turnovers weren't
Mhm.
there. And if you're doing it after makes, it's a little more artificial. So if you're able to get it more naturally in the flow of play, how does that help your defense and then just make everything come down a little bit?
Yep, for sure. Alex in the chat said that Kuzma mentioned that Keith is going to employ an unconventional offense, which you also mentioned. But what do you think that means beyond just pace? Like the guys they score and where on the floor they try to score from?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I tried poking around. Keith's obviously been around a bunch of different spots, and I tried to ask today, where's he trying to get from? And I don't think the schemes are, as rigid. Where you're going to be able to see the clear influence of
Mhm.
the Popovich system or something like that. It's not quite
Yeah.
that cut and dry. Um, I'm excited to see it. I really don't know have a good idea of what they're going to do offensively, but it is interesting that Kuzma called it unconventional. I think the two things you can definitely count on are ball and player movement. It's going to
Mhm.
be they're going to try and move it around.
Yeah, I like that. That's fine with me. Just gonna let's maybe go back to Poole here for a minute. There's just some interesting stuff. Like for me, it's he was definitely better personally, offensively as an on-ball player, but there's still a big difference between on ball and a true actual point guard. So, do you think we see him a good amount of time with another co-facilitator on the floor? Like that's part of what I think Brogdon can do from him is he's probably a little better as an off-ball player than Poole right now, but can still help facilitate and create and take some of the pressure off Poole. I think that's the thing that unlocks Poole is when he doesn't have to worry about like this full-time split of do I score for myself or do I have to create for everybody? It's if somebody can kind of do some of those things. Even Kuzma could lighten the load there. We saw early in his Wizards career him doing a lot more facilitating than maybe he got to do last year. So I don't know, just one of those two guys I think needs to be the one to kind of help take some of that pressure off Poole to just like create offense the whole game.
Yeah, I agree. And Kuzma talked a little bit about how one of the things that he wants to personally improve on is his passing and his
Okay.
ability to get others involved. Um, they got Bub is obviously a point guard. His impact is TBD.
Mhm.
But if he's getting a decent amount of reps, he can take some of that pressure off. Um, I think, you know, Dawkins called Bilal a big guard still, which is
Okay.
interesting just because, he's, I just think of him as a wing. But if
Yeah.
he's going to be a big guard and he's going to get some more playmaking opportunities this year, he's someone who can also take some of that responsibility off Jordan.
Let's use that as the segue here. One
Yeah.
of the things I had on our list was Coulibaly and expectations for him in year two. So just where are you at there? One of the nice things we heard, I guess, is well, he's suddenly bigger now, which is always fun to hear. I think the people that are still holding on to the like Coulibaly turns into Giannis, fantasies, like that's nice to hear. He also had this kind of later growth spurt, but I don't know what's a realistic year for him in year two, in your opinion.
Yeah, there are two things that I really look at. What are the next steps he can take as a defender? He
Hmm.
obviously showed flashes of being a really impactful player on that side of the ball. But, one of the comparisons that I had thought about for him was Herb Jones in New
Yeah.
Orleans. And I just put both their stats side by side. Herb had a much better rookie year, both offensively and defensively.
Hmm.
Not like a crazy difference between the two, but a significant difference is kind of how I'd put it.
Okay.
But yeah, Bilal shows defensive flashes. Can he do that more consistently? He's got 10 more pounds. He's a little bit taller. Is he able to take some more bumps? Is he able to play with a little more physicality? And are we ending this season? Are we halfway through the season in talking about him as a guy who's on the fringes of an all defensive team? Or at least someone who we feel like will be in that conversation in the next couple of years. And then the second thing is he started the season really promisingly, shooting the ball from three. And then it tailed off. He was 25% and 29% in February and March, respectively. I asked him about what that was during media day, and he said that he felt it was because of just the strain of 82 games. It started to wear on him near the end of the year. He obviously missed the
Sure.
last chunk of the season due to the wrist injury.
Yep.
You got that one year, you know how to take care of your body a little bit more. You're ideally not going to hit as much of a wall as a rookie does.
Hmm.
Can you get the shooting up to, let's say, 34%, which is where he
Yeah.
finished last year? But if you can get to 34, 35%, and it's that all throughout the season rather than a really hot start and then tailing off, what's real is, I guess, what I'm trying to figure out from his 3-point stroke.
A consistent mid 30s on reasonable volume without hesitancy about taking those shots. I
Yes.
think would be a good progression in year 2. And then obviously you want to see it look clean enough that, hey, we can
Yes.
expect it to progress even further beyond that in the next couple years. I'm glad you mentioned the rookie wall piece here too, because I think that's even more of a factor for someone like Coulibaly coming in. He wasn't ever expected to be a prospect in last year's draft class. Like that was sort of a late thing where he kind of just showed out enough with the eyes on him from Wembanyama to like get himself on the draft boards, but didn't come from an American AAU system where you play 3-4 games a day sometimes, if not more. And when you're playing internationally, you practice a couple times a week. You may only play one game a week, especially for someone like him coming up from an under 21 program. So I'm sure for him that like hit him harder than most American older rookies specifically would have been. Like if you're playing a guaranteed 32 games in college, Coulibaly really played late into the year, got right in the draft process, and then immediately came and started working out with the Wizards. So I would imagine by February, like around the time he got injured, he was probably pretty cooked at that point. So just being more ready for that physically in year 2, I think will go a long way for him, especially with the shooting.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, so much of shooting comes from the legs,
Mhm.
and if you're able to get that consistent power, you're not losing as much as the year goes on. It's going to help. And if the year ends and Bilal is a really impactful defender, someone who
Mhm.
shoots 34, 35% from three consistently, and if near the end of the season we're starting to see a little bit more flashes in terms of playmaking, which we did see at times last year, but if we start seeing a little bit more and he's someone who can play a little bit more with the ball in his hands as a creator, you got to get pretty excited. And I think that's really what like the realistic high end expectation is.
Yep, totally agree. It never makes no sense in the chat asked about the fact that, in his opinion, Coulibaly ducked a lot of questions about his shooting. I don't know if you had a similar observation, but it, did you hear anything from him about how he expects to shoot the ball in year 2?
I don't think he gave specific numbers or anything like that. I also didn't feel like he ducked any questions about the shooting.
Okay, well, that's good. All right, let's keep it rolling here. Let's maybe hit the other young guys here on the team. So a good amount of stuff back and forth. Alex Sarr, everybody in the fan base, I think, just wants some nuggets to give them like little pieces of mind here and there that like, okay, what we saw in summer league is not what we can expect this year. And I think the team, his teammates as a whole, have said like really good things about him, especially the defensive impact they expect him to have at a gate. At least that was my read on it. Did you have a similar sort of impression from teammates?
Yeah, 100%. And if we're talking about summer league, it's a 4-game sample. Like you
Yep,
don't want to overreact to it.
for
I
sure.
will say from everything that we've heard, the defense is a lot further ahead than the offense is. And
Yep.
that's okay.
Mhm.
That's like where like being an impactful defensive player as a start is a really great thing for someone as young as he is to be a
Yep.
big who could come in and really it's TBD obviously, but
Mhm.
for everything we've heard, he's going to be someone who can play near the rim, switch out onto the perimeter, and really be someone who you look at not like as a plus defender early in his career. Offensively, we got to figure it out still. The one thing that we get to see as media at the end of practices is a lot of the individual shooting work that these guys go through.
Mhm.
His shot, I'm not a shot doctor. I don't know for sure. It doesn't look fantastic. I will say
Yeah,
it's a little slow
we'll hit you
and
too.
it's got like a little hitch at times. He shot 29.8% last year at Perth. So there's going to be some, it's just going to be a slower process.
Mhm.
Um, does he show flashes? Does he show flashes of being able to create? Um, does he show an ability to know when to defer to the ball? I think in summer league he's the guy, and so there's a little bit more of an expectation for him to helm the offense in a way that's probably not um, ideal, and he's not going to have to do that in DC and during the regular season. So I think that's going to be beneficial for him.
We heard a lot about Bub Carrington and just his competitiveness so far and his already like willingness to compete with other grown men out on the court so far and not backing down from that challenge early. Anything else that you've heard about Carrington that you think Wizards fans would be equally interested to hear about?
Just doubling down on the competitiveness thing. This is something that Kispert said to us either
Mhm.
yesterday or 2 days ago. They're in a live situation. I think this might have been either in training camp or before training camp,
Mhm.
and Bub is picking up Poole full court. zigzagging him up and down, gets a steal, got a dunk, gets another steal, and Kispert compares him to a car, like, one of those wind up cars, because you let him on the ground, he just takes off.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's good. We can live with that a little bit. I just want to see him get opportunities this year, whatever the case may be. I think he's really going to be the guy that's in the opposite position from Sarr, because I didn't think the defense was all that particularly good last year at Pittsburgh, and the fact that they play a very physical sort of smash mouth style maybe kind of masked some of the things on his end. So that's an opportunity for him to kind of grow, and I think the offense will see a lot more flashes there. Maybe not great efficiency; you don't expect that from a rookie, but any sense for like how he, Poole, and Brogdon kind of may all fit together? Do you think there's any opportunity for us to ever see all three of them on the court at the same time together?
I wouldn't rule it out. I think that's one thing that Dawkins said in the preseason press conference, where he was like, "We're gonna try stuff, and it might be
Mhm.
weird." Um, he made it very clear that they're not just throwing stuff at the wall, but that they're being, intentional. But they're
Sure.
gonna go do some different things here, and you might see those three guys play together. With Bub and with all the rookies, actually, something that I was thinking about today. I was just walking back from lunch, and this is where my mind goes
I love it.
now. You know, every guy they drafted, let's say they all hit their, 95th percentile offensive outcomes.
Mhm.
One thing that I really like about the choices the Wizards made is that none of these guys are inherently going to get played off the court because of defensive size or
Mhm.
lack thereof. Bub is like 6'4", Keyshawn's 6'7".
Yep.
Obviously, Sarr, like the calling card is defense. So all
Sure.
of these guys, I think it was Zach Lowe, but I'm not 100% sure. A few years ago, talked about Luca's size, him at being
Mhm.
at 6'8", 6'9", or whatever, and said that, for Luca, the size isn't. Some guys get to use their size like a sword. They get to use it as a weapon to attack. For a guy like Luca, or for someone who's not a great defender, size can also be a shield. It
Yeah.
means that you're not going to get picked on
Mhm.
immediately. And so for, even Bub, he's obviously the shortest one and he's a point guard. For him to have that size, it really helps him.
Yeah, just harder to pick on a guy
Exactly.
that's even if he's a little on like the slight side as a rookie, he's still a bigger dude by comparison to some of the point guards they've had the last couple years. Bub also mentioned both Malcolm Brogdon and Anthony Gill as veterans that have sort of been helping him so far, but also talked about Poole and Bagley. Anything you've noticed from any of these other guys about just who's taking like which of the rookies kind of under their wing? So for George and Sar, any sense for kind of who's got an arm around them more often than the rest?
Yeah, it's hard to tell so far,
Mhm.
to be honest, just because again, the part that we get to see at the end of practice is just like the very,
Shooting
very
drills and
like
stuff.
shooting
Yeah.
drills, exactly.
Yep.
I am curious to see what that looks like throughout the season, as we get into the games and as we get into, open locker room, that kind of a thing.
Mhm. Another kind of consistent theme, I think, and honestly, we heard this last year too, but it's nice to hear that the 15-win season didn't totally destroy the vibes, but people keep talking about the chemistry with this group and how much they all like each other, and I think those are great things to hear. Like, we'll see how that holds up over the course of, an ultimately pretty long season, but I don't know, I think you can tell when these guys are in the room, like, if the vibes are good and people are laughing and joking and getting along, and from the clips we've seen, that seems to be, you know, pretty defensible, that actually is a true statement. But I don't know, you're closer to those guys than we are. Is there a decent amount of camaraderie so far?
I 100%. I think there definitely is. I think there's a level of closeness for the team.
Mhm.
Again, no one has lost a game yet. There has not been, one argument about who should take shots or anything like that yet.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it's so early. It's, you can't make things are great now. Will they be great in February? It's hard to say. One
Mhm.
thing that I do like is I think the organization has been intentional about the things they do environment wise to make this a
Sure.
good place to go to work. Just like we all go to work. You know what I mean? It's nice to go to a nice looking office.
Absolutely.
They redid the practice facility locker room, according to Corey Kispert.
Okay.
You got to eat food at the facility, right? If the
Yep.
food sucks, it's not great.
You're
Malcolm
not gonna wanna
Brogdon,
spend
who's
as
been
much
at a
time
couple,
there. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Malcolm Brogdon, who's been at a couple different places, said that the food is among the best he's had in the league. So
That's great.
there's been some meaningful investment from the team to try and make it better. This was a detail I put in my story. They did a party for the entire organization at the Pendry, which is a really nice hotel down by the
Mhm.
wharf at DC. And they were very intentional about giving, you can bring your family. We have a separate place for kids to play. We have a bunch of games
Oh,
set up.
cool.
You can leave them there. Don't worry about it. Come upstairs, have a great time. And it was a really great time, apparently.
Mhm.
So these are all things that I've been trying to think about how I want to describe it. It's like, you smooth things out throughout the year. So something that's, maybe a 2 out of 10 on the disagreement scale doesn't go to a 6 just
Yep.
because you're in a bad mood that day.
That's a great way to frame that, and the little stuff matters,
Yes.
especially over the course of a very long season, and
Little
that's
stuff
been
becomes bad over
yep,
like a 6-month thing.
exactly. It can bubble and fester, and that's an area where the Wizards historically have been a little kind of behind the times, right? Like, late to get a practice facility, one of the last teams in the league to get their own chef. Like, it's stuff where they kinda got stuck a little behind the curve and then had to catch up with the rest of the league, and this one, it sounds like they're recognizing more of these things where they can kind of be league leaders, and that's also another way to start to get, more good vibes that spread throughout the league. So if you're another free agent and you hear from even Valanciunas, if let's say he's gone by December or something, he's still got positive things to say about the organization, and word spreads, right? It's a pretty small fraternity, so guys know where they're going to be in a comfortable environment, and even just taking care of the families and stuff like that is something that resonates with players too.
I think it was who was it that said this? It was Dawkins. He said that,
Okay.
if at the end of a career a player says, "Where did you feel?" If players ask, "Where did you feel most supported?"
Hmm.
We want it to be Washington. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I think that's exactly, the thing that you're saying, that reputation that builds up. One thing I found interesting was when they first talked to Brogdon, he said that the team told him, "Hey, we want you to be a leader. We want you to help us build this culture." And he
Hmm.
was like, I want to see, and I don't know if he said this to them or if this was just something he was thinking, but
Sure.
he wanted to see the investment from their end. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
far, he's seen the investment.
Hey, that's all you can ask for, right? Like, it's still early for everybody, but just that people are coming in and not immediately calling BS on that stuff, I think is another great sign there too. Uh, all right, so hitting most of the things on my list here. Just maybe one last one on just sort of how guys have looked. Is there one player sort of lower on the depth chart that you've heard kind of mentioned more than others of like, hey, this guy's been a pleasant surprise to people? Or is it Keyshawn George is further along than maybe people thought? Or, I've heard a couple little things about Patrick Baldwin and how he's looked so far. I think Kuzma had some nice things to say about him. So maybe that's the guy. But anyone like that, kind of the lesser heralded guys that you think may actually surprise some folks this year.
Baldwin was actually the guy that I was going to bring up. I think
Okay.
Kuzma said that he's starting to use his frame a little bit better, and obviously when you've got a pretty imposing frame like PBJ does, I think that's pretty impressive. This is obviously a little bit higher up the depth chart,
Yep.
but Corey Kispert I think is someone who it's easy to look past him just because he's not someone who's drafted super recently. He's been around the team, and his improvements have been subtle. He's not someone who plays with the ball all the time. But he's made meaningful improvements to his game, and I think that Keefe's offense and the up tempo style and the movement based style that they're going to play is a really good fit for what he wants to.
Kispert's an interesting one for me because I could very easily see, at least on the offensive end, him having a similar post All Star break jump the way Denny Avdia did last year, when there are a few less vets here on the roster guy that with more touches, there's sort of untapped ceiling there offensively for him. And even as a guy who was an older rookie coming in, it still took him 3 or 4 years to really settle into like super high volume as a college player. So I think that it's reasonable to expect he'll keep. He's not a finished product at this point just because he's already in his mid-20s there. It's just, does he play so well that a team that needs shooting goes out and gets him? And this front office has not been shy about trading the guys that are in that sort of, they're tweeners, right? Like, they're young enough you could see them here long term, but also and maybe they're not a part of that total long-term blueprint. Like, Gafford is gone, Avdia's gone. Could Kispert be the next one? So I'm really curious to just kind of see how his year, maybe above anybody else, really plays out for them.
Yeah, same here. And obviously, he's got the contract situation.
Yep,
They got
exactly.
until October 21st to come
Mhm.
together on a deal. So we'll see. But he's an RFP after this year, so the team obviously controls has a decent amount of control there. So Either way, if he has a big jump, it's good news for the Wizards.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked to see them kind of settle on a team-friendly deal and then just sort of reset their options for, what they do with him maybe in the offseason, if that's the case too. Johnny Davis, just got to ask about him real quick here. He's kind of the forgotten man, if a former 10th pick can be. I just haven't heard anything. Like, no, I haven't heard a single quote, but I'm not there for all of these things. So I want to hear if you've heard anything from anybody about how Davis has looked. Like, he hasn't even featured much in any of the Wizards sort of like digital media stuff thus far. So just, I don't know, where is Johnny Davis? Do we need to put out like a missing persons? Like, has he looked okay? Have you heard anything about him so far?
I can tell you he's at practice. No one has really asked about him too much. I
Okay.
think that's a factor of a couple things. The guard room has so many interesting storylines
Sure.
and new storylines with Bub, Brogdon, Poole moving to the one, and there's so much other stuff to look at. And I think that also factors with him getting buried a little bit on the depth chart. One thing I am curious about is, you know, this is a team that is priding itself on player development above all else.
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of that is going to be focused, understandably, on the players where they've invested a lot in terms of draft capital.
Yep.
The Alex Sarrs, the Bilal Coulibalys, the Bub
Hmm.
Carringtons, etc., Keyshawn George. But one thing that's true, looking at the previous stops for the top two guys in the front office with the Clippers, Michael Winger with the Clippers, Terrence Mann, and
Hmm.
then with Will Dawkins and OKC, Lou Dort.
Yep.
These were unheralded players who the team developed into above average starters.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying it's going to be Johnny Davis. Maybe it's a guy like
Sure.
Jared Butler. Maybe it's Justin Champagnie. Maybe it's one of the guys they brought in on the Exhibit 10 deals, the Kira Lewis, Leaky Black. But do they get one of those guys to be a consistent and impactful rotation player or above?
Mhm.
Is there someone there that they're able to really like look around and say, this is someone the league has looked past? This is someone we can really make into something.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? Like the good teams do that. They find a few guys that are diamonds in the rough essentially, and that they turn them into, like impact players, like
Mhm.
worthy of like, former lottery pick level guys. And Mann and Dort are both interesting ones because there's at least some similarities there in terms of Davis from a physical profile. Like they're maybe not the craziest athletes, but they're strong, guys that aren't going to back down defensively. And even if you can just turn yourself into that as somebody who can come in and turn the water off for other players, like all teams can find a spot on a roster for a defensive minded guard. So that'll be pretty interesting to see, I think.
And I think that's something that, I feel like that was something that Davis was praised on coming into the draft and in his first few
Mhm.
seasons. So I am curious to see, if it's him, if it's someone else, if they're able to unlock something. And I think that, this is a team historically that has not been good with player development, and they've made
Yeah.
really intentional and what they hope are impactful changes in the front office and in the coaching staff, especially the coaching staff. The coaching staff, this is something they've said again and again. They've found people who love to coach, who love to teach, who love to develop players, and who have that as a key part of their background.
Mhm.
Let's see if that actually comes, where's the effect of that?
You said it perfect, man. We need that to start to translate. Even for, their higher level lottery picks, these are guys that are far from finished products. So you're not taking someone like Wembanyama, like obviously he's going to get better and things like that, but that's a dude that's ready to go from day
Yes.
one. Like Sarr needs some nurturing here, and hopefully they've got the infrastructure in place to really take advantage of that.
And the players they have drafted also lend to needing more player development intentionally. They're
Mhm.
taking high
Yep.
upside bets, which I think
Project
is
B
very
guys.
smart. They're
Yep.
taking very young players. All of these guys that we talked about are like 19 or 20, right? And
Mhm.
so you have to be very intentional then. If you're not going to draft, a Dalton Connect, right?
Sure.
If you're not going to draft, a 22-year-old guy who spent some more time in college and is a little bit more pro ready, I understand that decision because you want to hit, you're not looking for a high floor player at this point in your rebuild, but you got to make sure that you can actually develop the guy.
Any sense for if there's a dedicated shooting coach on the staff or someone that's really helping these guys with their mechanics so far? Like last year, we saw a lot of these guys that needed some work. working out with like James Posey a decent amount of the time. But any sense for this sort of newly reconstructed staff if someone is really like focusing on that area?
I don't know. I have not. That is not something I know, but I can definitely ask and check it out.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think there's probably some interest from fans on because that's an area where a lot of these guys need work. And just
Mm.
knowing that there are some famous shooting coaches in the league. I know we don't have like a Chip England or one of those kind of guys, but if just somebody kind of has that, in their background of, hey, that's an area where I can help these guys grow would be pretty big. Somebody else that's likely to be interested in sort of the long game here and team building aspect. The Capital City Go-Go have a new general manager that caused some interest from Wizards fans today based on sharing a similar name with another famous Wizard. So Johnathan Wall is coming in as the new Go-Go frontman. Any idea about him, what his background is about? I think Wizards fans would be interested to hear a little bit more about the inside here. And it has since been confirmed that this is not the John Wall, but our new John Wall. What can we expect from him?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think he was
Okay.
a former agent, but interested to see what his impact is on the go-go.
Yeah, I'm also curious if that means former Go-Go GM Amber Nichols has moved on to another team. She was a holdover from the previous staff. I assume that either means she's progressed within the organization or taken a different role elsewhere. But she's someone that they spoke highly of all of last season. So if she's moved on, that's probably a loss for them. But hopefully that means a better opportunity for her elsewhere. But that's always an interesting dynamic for me as someone who likes watching like a more G League basketball than the average normal human being. But that relationship between front office and how they execute the vision and how the G League team aligns with that, I think is really interesting. There was a lot of praise for Amber, but she also the people that she was bringing in under the last year of Tommy Shepard were people that Tommy Shepard earmarked as people he was interested in. So I'm just sort of curious, like what that means for the development of the team here.
Yeah, I do know that when they're looking at the coaching staffs, they see it all as an extension of one coaching staff.
I like that. It never makes no sense in the chat says that per Josh Robbins, she got promoted within the organization. So great. Congratulations for her. And that's nice to see. I think it's the thing that we sleep on sometimes as fans too. Like this is a developmental story for staff within your organization too. And that's another way to keep good people is if there's room for upward growth and mobility, within an organization. So shout out to her for doing that.
Yeah.
Apparently, oh, go ahead, please.
One thing I find pretty interesting is
Sure.
when these guys came in last year, Winger and Dawkins, they really
Mhm.
did look at the first year as an evaluation and assessment process. And,
Yep.
they made some pretty big changes across the team. Obviously, one of the biggest ones was the head coach,
Mhm.
but they kept people around as well. And, they were intentional about those decisions.
Per Jonathan Wall's LinkedIn page, he is a Harvard Law School graduate and worked for a law firm in New York City for a while. Was named to the National Black Lawyers 40 Under 40 list, and just wanted to get back into working with athletes. So as you mentioned, he became an NBA PA certified agent in 2020. Has worked with players directly and is now moving over to the front office side. So this is another guy that probably has relationships with other agents and players and things like that too. So I love stuff like this. I think these are the really underrated behind the scenes moves that can help you start to like upgrade your organization. So shout out to them for thinking outside the box here a little bit.
Yeah, and speaking of Amber Nichols, I'm not 100% sure which one it was, but she also made a you know number under number list that I think the Athletic put out.
She might be under 30. She's pretty young. I don't know if it's that necessarily, but she is on the younger side, which again is another cool thing to see that they've got a few like rising stars within the industry here too, and that's not surprising to me given just sort of the way everybody talked about her. So that's good stuff, and we'll take it.
Yep, I'm trying to see if I can find the thing. It was 40 under 40.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, either way, she's still probably on the young side. Not even close to 40 at this point too. So that's pretty cool.
Yep,
All right.
32.
Anything? What's that?
32 years old.
32. Yeah, love that. So
And she's a director of amateur evaluation now.
okay, cool. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's good experience working in the G League and figuring out what works and what translates, and we'll see if that pays dividends for them in the long run here. Anything that you've we haven't hit on here that's stood out to you or noteworthy or something that you think Wizards fans would get a kick out of?
Nothing that comes to mind. I think the games are going to reveal a lot more.
Sure.
Seeing who they want to play and really getting your first looks, obviously, at the rookies. And I really want to know what Bilal looks like in year two, right?
Yeah.
The second year jump is a big one for a lot of players. And do we see the first steps toward that?
I was looking for the dates here as we go. First real preseason game is on October 6th. I guess that's
Sunday.
yeah, Sunday. So that's the one that is actually up in Montreal, correct?
Yes.
That you're there for. So uh, first of all, just have a great time in
Thanks so much.
Montreal and enjoy the city here. We're loving the coverage here so far. But for anyone that isn't already following you, where can they follow and find more of your work?
Yeah, you can find my work at the Washington Post Wizards page. You can find me on Twitter at Varun Shankar, ByVarunShankar. And you can also find me on Instagram,
There you
same
go.
handle as the Twitter, but add an underscore NBA to that.
Perfect. If you didn't catch any of that, anybody listening, hit me up. I'll point you in the right direction here.
Appreciate it.
Like I said, been great insight so far. I appreciate any video coverage or things like that you're putting out too, because it's just nice to get eyes on these guys. You can hear all the great quotes you want, but being able to see it for yourself, even just a little bit while they're shooting around, I think gives fans kind of peace of mind. And you start to get that warm, fuzzy feeling that like basketball is almost back here in the city.
2 more days.
I love it, man. Okay. Hopefully this is the first of many appearances for you here on the podcast. But I really appreciate the time here, and just like I said, have fun in the city and enjoy this first game, first official game on the beat here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody, you know the drill at this point. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like button for us, rate, review, subscribe. That's always helpful to make sure that the podcast is, available for other Wizards fans and they can find it on YouTube and things like that. Presented by betonline.ag, and we will catch you all next time.